walk into any gym today and you will see the same things. People training harder than ever, using the most sophisticated gym equipment, taking the most advanced supplements, getting all this so-called scientific advice, being informed by so many influencers on YouTube. And yet most natural bodybuilders never achieve their genetic potential. In fact, many spend years training and never achieve the body they always wanted. And this is not because they're not disciplined, not because they are not training hard, but because they are following advice that has never been designed for natural lifters in the first place. And today I want to discuss the 3 biggest mistakes that natural bodybuilders make. Those mistakes, they are everywhere. They are promoted by all kinds of influencers. They are repeated on social media, and they are preventing thousands of natural bodybuilders to actually build the physique they could have achieved. So let us start with the biggest mistake of all, and this is training every muscle twice per week. Unfortunately, this was propounded by so many so-called experts, influencers on YouTube especially, who were trying to prove in any way, especially scientifically, from God knows what scientific experiments, that training every muscle twice per week will actually help a natural bodybuilder to develop best possible body. And you have probably heard this hundreds of times. If you only train muscle once per week, you are going to be leaving your gains on the table because that muscle will recover in 72 hours and therefore the muscle will start shrinking. This is probably the biggest nonsense I have ever heard, and something that has stopped so many natural bodybuilders to actually develop the body they could have developed. The problem with this concept is that simply ignores very important fact, and this is that the muscle doesn't grow during training, the muscle grows during recovery. So that distinction basically changes everything. You have to understand that the purpose of training is not growth. The purpose of training is to stimulate growth. And growth happens during the recovery period. Now think what happens when you train chest, for example, on Monday. You create muscle damage. You create inflammation. You create, obviously, fatigue. You stress connective tissues. You place great demands on your central nervous system. Your body and also the whole unit that you have stressed in that particular workout now needs time to adapt. But before the recovery is complete, most people start training that muscle group again. They interrupt the recovery process and they wonder why their progress is slowing down. So the question should not be how often can I train a muscle? The question should be how often can I recover from training that muscle. For most natural bodybuilders, training each muscle once per week is often enough. And this was the approach that so many professional bodybuilders used and are using it now. And that concept actually started from 90s, because before 90s, people used to train muscle twice per week. So natural bodybuilders struggled. People who were enhanced, they managed to continue progressing, training muscle twice per week, but the naturals struggled, and I was one of those naturals. So training muscle twice per week was not productive, and is not productive now. So from 90s, when the professional bodybuilders who were enhanced realized that training muscle once per week is much better than training muscle twice per week, some natural bodybuilders also followed, and they started training muscle once per week, and I was also one of them. And this is when I saw the biggest progress in my muscular development. So the natural bodybuilder must respect recovery more than enhanced lifter, because enhanced lifter are helped with all kind of different steroids and other hormones, and that can speed up recovery. So some of them can even train muscle more often, but the natural lifter has to train muscle once a week. So let me explain this more in detail, because So many very popular influencers on YouTube are actually sending misinformation out there that every muscle should be trained twice per week, simply because they do not understand this. Now, every muscle has a neural component. When you train chest, for example, you are not only activating muscle fibers, you are also activating the same motor cortex regions. You are activating the same spinal motor neurons. You're also causing the same motor patterns and the same neuromuscular junctions. So when you train chest 2 or 3 days later, you are asking the same neural pathways to perform again. So you need to understand that in this sense, there is also a local neural fatigue component in addition to muscular fatigue. So you're not only exhausting your muscle, your chest, for example, training it on Monday, you are also exhausting your neural components, which are all involved in training that particular muscle. So training a muscle twice per week does not only stresses the muscle twice, but it also requires repeated activation of the same motor units, motor neurons, and neural pathways, which are responsible for recruiting that muscle. As a result, both muscular recovery and neural recovery may be incomplete when you train that muscle often or twice per week. And of course, if you train that muscle twice per week, these pathways will not fully recover and they will reduce performance and recovery. And this is again very important, especially for natural bodybuilders. Now, the second mistake that most natural bodybuilders are making is training with excessive intensity. Today, many believe that every set should be taken to complete failure. This has been promoted by a lot of professional bodybuilders, a lot of so-called experts, influencers on YouTube. But one thing to understand is that if you copy training of professional bodybuilders, you will not progress simply because you are not enhanced. They are all enhanced. You are not. So you depend on your natural hormones. So your recovery is limited in comparison with their recovery, because all these powerful substances that they're taking, steroids, growth hormone, insulin, they will make them recover much faster than you. So they can train muscle twice per week if they want. They can go to failure. They can go beyond failure. Even when they do that, they suffer tremendously because so many of them become crippled because of that nonsense. But you, as a natural bodybuilder, you should stop doing that. Simply because if you train with excessive intensity, you will not progress. I know few people in the gym where I am. I know them for more than 10 years. They are natural. 10 years ago, they looked exactly the same as they do now. Every time I see them in the gym, they train with some crazy intensity, lifting some enormous weights, and they have never changed. I believe they wanted to change, but that never happened. So because they were not rational, they were not objective, they didn't look in the mirror, they didn't realize that they didn't change after 10 years. And the reason is probably that they are training with intensity which is too high. What most of them try to achieve is to achieve that final part of their workout when they feel completely exhausted. But exhaustion is simply not the same thing as muscle growth. So think about this logically. Every muscle has a limited capacity to recover, especially if you are a natural bodybuilder. So every time you push to failure or beyond failure, recovery demands increase dramatically. So you're actually asking for something which is impossible. You are training as a professional bodybuilder, but you are not enhanced. So this is going to cause you to enter that stage of chronic exhaustion, chronic fatigue, and your progress will simply stop. And funny enough, there are so many professional bodybuilders, Mr. Olympias, who build their bodies without actually going to failure. Most of them never did go to failure. Just remember Lee Haney saying, stimulate, do not obliterate. Because Lee Haney understood that going to failure is not going to take you anywhere. It's just going to make you exhausted. It's going to make you completely overwhelmed with that CNS stress, and also the risk of injury will dramatically increase. So Lee Haney, who won 8 Mr. Olympias, didn't go to failure. And he's famous by saying, stimulate, do not obliterate. So not just him, many others. Phil Heath, Mr. Olympia. Jay Cutler, Mr. Olympia. Dexter Jackson, Mr. Olympia. And many other bodybuilders throughout history of bodybuilding, especially in golden era. They simply didn't go to failure. Now remember this, very important, because so many of you have been asking this question. Natural bodybuilders should train with more volume and less extreme intensity. I've just explained why that training to failure or beyond failure will take you nowhere. Now let me explain to you why higher volume will give you what you're actually expecting. Now let's get more into detail, because this is unheard on YouTube especially. Training to failure or beyond failure requires the nervous system to recruit virtually every available motor units in an attempt to complete that last rep or the rep beyond failure. Now, as fatigue accumulates, neural drive must increase dramatically to maintain force production. This places a much greater demand on central nervous system than stopping 1 or 2 reps short of failure, where performance remains high, but neural fatigue is significantly lower. So this is another question that so many ask. Oh, but if I train 4 or 5 times per week, that means that I'm going to stress my CNS because there are too many training sessions per week. Well, not true. Now, you need to understand that bodybuilder who trains 4 or 5 times per week, but stops every set 1 or 2 reps shy of failure, will accumulate less CNS fatigue than somebody training 2 or 3 times per week and repeatedly taking every single set to failure or beyond failure. The CNS is stressed more by the intensity of effort within a set than the number of sets performed in that particular session. In other words, one all-out set to failure is neurologically much more demanding than several hard sets performed 1 or 2 reps shy of failure. Now, when you perform 4 or 5 sets per exercise, for example, for chest, with 4 or 5 sets which are shy of failure, you will accumulate high number of quality reps that will actually stimulate growth but not destroy your CNS. When you perform only 1 set to failure in 1 exercise, you will not accumulate enough reps to stimulate optimal muscle growth, but you will fry your CNS. And this is why so many great bodybuilders build amazing bodies simply training with moderate weights, not going to failure, or stopping their sets 1 or 2 reps shy of failure. And this is another thing. People always ask, but the number of sets that you recommend, which is 20 to 30 for major muscle groups, is too high, and therefore this high number of sets will actually cause CNS to get exhausted. But this is again not true. In reality, your CNS is more stressed when you're grinding to failure rather than performing a greater number of highly productive sets stopped 1 or 2 reps shy of failure. And remember this, volume is mainly muscular stressors. Failure is primarily a neurological stressor. And this should explain everything clearly to you. Now, mistake number 3 that most natural bodybuilders are making is eating too much carbohydrates and not enough protein, because they've been influenced by so many so-called experts that you should eat more carbohydrates than protein because they spare protein and they're good for you because they help you build glycogen, are absolutely similar nonsense. Therefore, people end up eating 4, 5, 600 grams of carbs a day while eating 150 grams of protein a day. And what happens? Just look around. Most of natural bodybuilders that I know, that I see in the gym, and I've seen all around the world in hundreds of different gyms, are actually fat. Because they, for whatever reason, believe that if they eat more carbs, they will be bigger, heavier. They get bigger, heavier, but not because the muscles are making them bigger, heavier, but simply because they're getting fatter. So they feel heavy, they feel strong, they are walking slowly, hardly, because they're big now, but in reality, they're just fat. So you don't want to be one of them. And if you're doing the same mistake, you should be very careful. I'm not saying that carbohydrates are evil. They may help some people, but the problem is that you need to regulate your carbohydrate intake. You don't actually need 3, 4, 500 grams of carbs a day anyway, because you only need as much carbs as you burn through your glycogen. Now, in reality, you don't even need carbohydrates to replenish that glycogen, because that glycogen will be replenished via gluconeogenesis, and I have talked about it and explained it in detail in so many videos. So that dogma that you need carbs in order to replenish glycogen is absolutely not true. And even if you do, which will help you replenish glycogen, although you don't have to, but even if you do, you don't need anything more than 100 grams of carbs a day. Because if you train 4 or 5 times per week, and the amount of glycogen that you burn is never more than 50 to 70 grams, depending on your size and your workouts, you will not need more than that. But I say, okay, 100 grams, let's say that's the ceiling. And then what is more important for you is protein, because every single tissue in the body requires protein. So it's not just muscles. Everything else requires protein. Your blood requires protein. Your nerves require protein. Your hormones, your internal organs require protein. Your hair, your skin, your nails, everything. Protein, this is why it's called protein. Protos, meaning essential, number one. So everything needs protein. So because of that, it's not just that you need to eat high amount of protein per day because of the muscles, but actually because of the whole unit, the whole body, the whole complexity of your anatomy and physiology. So you need protein for everything. And good advice would be to be at least 2 grams of protein per kg of body weight. So if you are 90 kgs, you should be roughly eating around 180 grams of protein. Now, the protein should come from most biologically valuable protein sources. And, of course, these are number 1, eggs, number 2, meat, number 3, liver. Then you have fish, then you have chicken, then you have dairy. These are the highest quality protein sources that you should be eating every day. When it comes to fat, fat is also important because it's absolutely essential for production of your hormones, for example, and not just that, for many other physiological functions in the body. And also, you absorb protein better when you eat protein with fat. I advise protein to fat to be 1 to 0.5. So if you eat 200 grams of protein a day, I advise you to eat 100 grams of fat. Okay, some people can afford to eat more if they are already lean, if they have fast metabolism, if the training is really very, very good. But also some people, again, depending on individual characteristics, will be doing much better if they eat even less. So if you are overweight or obese, you should even eat less, maybe 50, 60 grams of fat and maybe 200, 250 grams of protein. So protein and fat are essential. For a natural bodybuilder, if you want to eat carbs, limit that amount, pay more attention to protein and fat because they are the ones that will help you build muscles. Carbohydrates have no biological value. They are not essential, and therefore you don't even need them. So even if you do, as I said, be careful, 70 to 100 grams of carbs a day, and that's all that you need. So let me summarize. Most natural bodybuilders never reach their potential for 3 reasons. First, they train muscle too frequently and never fully recover. Second, they use more intensity than necessary and constantly exceed their ability to recover. And third, they prioritize carbohydrates while underestimating the importance of protein. And notice something very important, that all these 3 mistakes have the same root cause. They ignore recovery. Natural bodybuilding is not how much punishment you can survive. Natural bodybuilding is all about providing the body with right stimulus, the right nutrition, and enough recovery that will allow the body to adapt. The people who understand this, they build muscle every year. The people who ignore this often spends decades simply spinning their wheels. You should train hard, you should recover fully, you should prioritize protein, be patient, and you may be surprised by how much muscle your body is truly capable of building. After 40 years in bodybuilding, coaching over 3,500 clients, competing 46 times, winning 17 shows, I have published for you 13 ebooks which are fully loaded with detailed explanation about everything you always wanted to know about bodybuilding. So if you want to start finally building muscle, burning body fat, and stop wasting time in the gym, click on that link in the comments and you can access my ebooks. Also, for the ones who want to learn how to train in perfect form, I have published Bodybuilding Blueprint course, in which I personally demonstrate and explain every single exercise for major muscle groups. So if you want to learn how to train in proper form, avoid injuries, and stop wasting time in the gym, click on the same link in the comments and you can access my Bodybuilding Blueprint course. So guys, if you have enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel, like the video, share the video, and also send me comments, and I will see you in the next video.